Hey everybody, this is Mr. Storm, and today we are going to start working on our maze game. So if you go into Canvas and you go to the project, you will see that I have given you this maze game zip folder. You need to download that, and then the first thing you need to do is extract those items into a new folder. So we'll grab this stuff. Actually, I'm going to create the new folder first. Let's create a new folder and call it maze game. Maze game. And we will grab all of these files in this zipped folder and we will drop them into the maze game folder. And once that's done extracting, we can actually delete the zip file. We don't need it anymore. What we're doing here is I've compressed these projects because they are quite big. They can get pretty large, and in order to download them efficiently, so you're not sitting there all class period waiting for this thing to download, I have to zip it because it compresses the data so that it's a much smaller file size. But the flip side of that is on the other end, you need to decompress that folder once you download it. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this. Actually, I'm just going to keep it. That's fine. I'll keep it. Now we're going to be working in this maze game folder, which has all that stuff from before. Now to open up the project so we can begin working on it, you're going to look at some of these folders here, and the folder we want to look at is the Assets folder. We want to go into Assets, and we want to go to Scenes. And we want to open up any one of these scenes. Just go with Level 1. When you double-click level1.unity, it's going to open up Unity for us, and it's going to build the project. So it's going to unpack it, and everything's going to do its thing. And we'll just give it a second while that happens. Or give it more than a second. Give it 5 seconds, 15 seconds, 34 seconds. All right, bring this over and set it up. Okay, so this is the project in Unity that we're going to be working on. This is a very simple maze game. I have a couple of scenes in here. Now, all the sprites are in there. The colliders are set up. Everything's ready to go. Okay, the only thing you need to do is fill up this scripts folder with something. And we're actually just going to write one script for this game. But let's take a look at what we have here so far and what we want to actually have happen in this game. So let's take a look at the scenes. So this is scene 1, this is level 1. This is a very easy level. All we want this character or your player to be able to do is move this ball over into this green area, and once they do, it takes them to the next level. That's it. That's the whole point of the game. Now, this is a very simple level in the beginning. Level 2 is a little bit more complicated, and we can actually add as many levels as we want to this. It's pretty easy to add new levels once you have the script set up and you have all the basic components in the game. We can make as many levels as we want. But right now we want to focus on allowing the character or allowing the player to move this ball using the code. So let's go ahead and write a script. So if we go into our scripts folder here, this is where we want to put all of our scripts so that things stay organized. I'm going to right-click in this menu, or in this panel here. I'm going to go to Create C# Script. All right, Create C# Script. And down here it gives me the option to name it something. I'm just going to name it Move. That works. Or actually, no, let's name it Player Controller. Because it is kind of our player controller script. It's the script that controls our player. All right, so now that I've created it and I've named it, when I click on it, hello, now, give it a second, it's thinking. All right, when I click on it and I look over here in the inspector, I can see that there's already some code there, right? Now, I can't do anything here. I can't edit it here. I can't change anything. I can just see what's in it. So what I want to do is I actually want to double click it to open it up in Visual Studio. Now if you're doing this at home and you're using a Mac or some other operating system like Linux or whatever, you may see a different editor. Visual Studio is a Windows editor. You might see an editor called MonoDevelop, and that's fine too. MonoDevelop's okay. But we're going to use Visual Studio in the classroom, so that's what I'm going to be teaching you is Visual Studio. All right. So we have our game here. This is our new script, And this script doesn't do anything. Let's talk about what's on here first. These first 3 lines are called libraries, just like with our console programs. These libraries allow us to access big libraries of code, and we can use these libraries to access methods or classes that exist in those libraries, so we don't have to rewrite a bunch of things that have already been invented, right? And we're using a couple of them so far. We're using system.collections, we're using system.collections.generic, and we're using Unity Engine, which is going to load in a bunch of new Unity methods that normally wouldn't exist in just a regular C# IDE. All right. We have one class here. It's a public class, and it's called player controller. And then we have this little colon here, mono behavior. Now, the player controller class it's called player controller because that's what we named it, right? And notice that it's its own class. All the scripts that we write are going to be individual classes. And so, if you remember back to last semester, that lesson about classes in C#, we talked about how to access code from one class to another. It's still going to apply the same way here. All right. And then this colon mono behavior is basically just, it's the base class from which every Unity script derives. So this is just indicating that it is a Unity class. Now, let me clean up these brackets a little bit because I don't like them like that. I like them like this. And I have my preferences. All right. So let's take a look at what we have here. We have a couple of methods. We have a void start method, and we have an update method. So we have a start method and an update method. And we have a couple of comments here telling us what start and update do for us. So let's take a look at start. Start says use this for initialization, meaning basically this is whatever we put in the start method is going to be code that gets run as soon as that script is called. So if we attach this to a character, and that character exists in the game from the very beginning, then this start code is going to run as soon as the game starts. Now, if we had this on an object that gets instantiated or gets brought into the game at a certain point, then as soon as that object is brought into the game, it's going to fire off whatever's in this start method. Then we have update. Now, update is called once per frame. Now, a frame is essentially just an individual slice of time within the game. So most games run at 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second, depending on your frame rate. This update method, if your game is running at 60 frames per second, is going to fire off this code 60 times per second, right? Because it's fired off once per frame. So what we want to do is we want to put code in here that needs to constantly be checked. Code that needs to constantly be running. So that's the difference between these two. We have start, which is code that needs to just run once at the beginning of the game, and then at the instantiation of this object, the beginning of this object. Then we have code in the update method that runs many times per second. So it needs to be running all the time. Okay, so that's a lot. We haven't even written any code yet, and it's already confusing. I get it. Let's make it a little more confusing, shall we? First thing we want to do is we want to get a reference to the object that we're going to move, right? We want to move this ball right here. Now this script is going to be attached to the ball, so it's actually pretty easy to reference that ball itself. Oh, let's open up Visual Studio here. There we go. I'm actually going to close out this Pac-Man script because I don't want it cluttering up my stuff. All right, so I want to reference that ball. Now, what I want to actually do is not just reference the ball itself. I want to reference something specific about the ball. If you remember in my last video, we talked about this thing called a Rigidbody 2D. The Rigidbody 2D is the component that allows any object in a Unity game to be able to move through physical space. Now, this controller that we're writing right now, the script, is a player controller script, and we're going to try to make it actually move. And so we probably need to get a reference to this Rigidbody 2D component. So let me show you how to do that. It's actually probably easier than you're thinking. So as soon as this object exists in our game, we want to get a reference to itself inside this start method. So I'm going to type player because we want to create a new player. And it's not going to, yep. I was trying to access a variable that doesn't exist yet. Let's create a variable real quick. All right. So what I need to do is create a new variable called player. And player is going to basically just be the player itself, right? The object we're attached to. So we're going to create a new private variable. And it's the variable type, instead of being like int or string, it's going to be actually a rigid body 2D type of variable, meaning we're creating a new rigid body 2D. All right, and we're going to call it player. All right, so now we have a new variable of the rigid body 2D type, and it's named player. And we're going to equal that. We're going to set player, our rigid body, equal to get component rigid body 2D. It's got to be capital. Okay, so what we've done here, let's walk through it again so it's really clear what we've just done. We created a new private variable. Private meaning it can only be accessed within this class. So we have a new private variable, and the type of variable it is, instead of being a number or a string, it's a rigid body 2D variable. Meaning that's the data that we're going to have stored in this variable, is a rigid body 2D. And then we've named it player. Pretty easy to do so far. And then in the start method, essentially when the game fires up, we want to set this player rigid body 2D equal to get component rigid body 2D. Now what that means, if we come over here back to Unity, if this script is attached to this object, then that get component rigid body 2D is basically saying get a component attached to this object here. And the component that we want to get is rigid body 2D. That's it. All we're doing with those couple of lines of code is saying I want to access this rigid body 2D attached to this player so that I can make changes to that rigid body 2D, meaning I can make changes to how fast it's moving and where it's moving and how big its mass is and stuff like that. So that's what we're doing so far. All right. Again, it can be confusing, but the more you do this, the easier it's going to be. Okay, so now we have a reference to our thing, to our player. What we need to do now is we need to start getting some input from the player itself, from the user, the person playing your game. Because we don't want this thing to move on its own. We want the player to move the game, or we want the player to move the object. Before we do that, though, I want to show you how this kind of works. So now that we have a reference to the rigid body 2D, I can actually call that rigid body 2D, and I can set its velocity. So player.velocity equal to vector2.right. Okay, so this vector2, what this means, vector2 is a variable type that essentially holds two values, horizontal and vertical. It holds an x and a y. Because it's a 2D game, we want to be able to hold x and y values when we're talking about moving in a certain area, right? This line of code is referencing that get component attached to the object, and it's setting its velocity, the velocity of that component, that rigid body 2D component, to be equal to right. Basically, we want it to move to the right. Now, if I want this to actually work in Unity, I have to click Attach to Unity, and it's going to compile itself. And any day now. Any day. Any day. Okay, and good. So now that it's running and I have no errors here, I know I can click Stop to stop debugging my program. So now I know it's working. If I go back over to Unity and click on that player controller script, I can see that my code has been updated now. Now I can see that I actually have the stuff that I've written in there. And as long as I make sure I have that script attached to my player, which I don't, I need to attach that script to my player now. If I look here, I've got my player controller script, and I hit play, that ball will start moving to the right. And it does. I actually now have some movement. So I've told that Rigidbody, and it stops here because there's colliders here, so it's keeping it from being able to move out of the realm of the game. But I told the Rigidbody of this component to actually move to the right once the game starts, and that's exactly what it's doing. But that's not what we really want it to do. We want to be able to take in input from our users. So I'm going to get rid of this line of code. I just wanted to show you how we can use that Rigidbody. We can access that Rigidbody and tell it to do things. All right, so what I need to do is I need to create a couple of variables. I'm going to create a float called v, and I'm going to create a float called h. Now, this float data type is essentially a number, but it can be it doesn't have to be a whole number. It can be a decimal. And we want to use it because what we're going to do next is we're going to take a value from our user. It's going to take a bit of explaining, so bear with me. So in Unity has something called Project Settings Input. I'm going to open that up. If you go to Edit, Project Settings Input, you can follow along with me. Unity already has a bunch of input types for the user to use. So basically, like, let's say I wanted a vertical input axis. So I wanted people to be able to push up and down on the keyboard or S and W on the keyboard, and that will provide vertical movement. Then I have this vertical axis here which handles that, right? So this is handling input from our user and it's applying it to the script. So we can access this vertical axis in the script. We can also access the horizontal axis in the script. So negative button and positive button, left and right, and we also have alternates, A and D. So we're going to access this horizontal and vertical axis in the game that we're using. What we need to do is when we go back to, one last thing. Let's say the user hits the S key, right? And the S key is the alternative negative button for vertical. If they hit the S key, the amount that they're pressing the S key is going to come up as a float value. It's either 0 or it's 1 or it's something in between. So if I'm pushing the key all the way down, it's going to be -1. If I'm pushing the key just a little bit, it's probably like -3 or -4 or -4, whatever. If it's the positive button, then it's going to be +1 if it's all the way down. If it's kind of down, it'll be like 0.7 or whatever. If it's not down at all, it's going to be 0. So we're looking for a number between 0, actually, we're looking for a number between 1 and -1, and any range of numbers in between those. So that's what we're looking for in our script. That's why we need a float variable for v and a float variable for h. Now we're going to set float v to be equal to input, because we want to get the input from the user. It's going to be get axis raw. Now get axis, we've already used this get before up here with get component, meaning we're trying to access something inside of Unity. So get, and then we have axis, which is an axis, right? We're going to get an axis, one of these. We're either going to get horizontal or vertical or fire 1 or mouse Y or submit or whatever. We're going to get one of these. And the raw is basically meaning there's going to be no filtering applied, no smoothing applied to this whatsoever. We just want to get whatever that number is going to be. All right, so get axis raw. And the axis we want to access is vertical. We want the vertical axis to be applied to our v variable. We can actually do the same thing for h. h equals input.get axis raw horizontal. Okay, so now all we've basically done is we've created two variables that are going to store a number between 1 and -1 based on the user pushing buttons on the keyboard. It's pretty easy. All right, next what we need to do is we need to make that button press do something in our game. So let's do that. Let us access that player like we did before, and we want to access the velocity on that player. And then we want to set that equal to a new vector2 because we want to be able to store two different variables. And it's going to be HV. Now if we look here, if you look there, it says vector2, and the first number is going to be our float x, and the second number is our float y. So if we think about math class, I know, boo math, but this is a math credit, so suck it up. If we think about our math class, when we do graphing, x is the horizontal axis, and y is the vertical axis, right? And so we want our horizontal movement to happen on the x-axis, and we want our vertical movement to happen on the y-axis. And so that's why h is the first number, or first variable, and v is the second variable. And I'm going to go ahead and close that off. So now with what we've written, when we run this game, we should actually be able to move our character with the keyboard now. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and attach this to Unity, let it debug, make sure I didn't make any crazy mistakes. I'm going to stop it. And then let's go into Unity and let's play the game. And see what happens. And come on. Okay, I'm moving. This is great. And I'm using the arrow keys to move my game. All right, I'll move my objects. Perfect. It's moving, it's moving. Good stuff. Now, it's not very exciting because it doesn't really move that fast. So how do we fix that? Well, if we go back to our script, we can think about this a little bit. Well, I want to make it move faster, but I don't know how fast I want to make it move. I want to be able to fix that quickly. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a public variable up here outside of my methods, just inside my class. I'm going to create a public float variable, and I'm going to call it speed. Okay, and I'm actually going to set that equal to, I don't know, we'll just set it to 1 for now. All right, so now I have this public float variable speed. All right, and what I want to do is I want to times, I want to multiply, oh, that's 8. I want to multiply my new vector2 by speed. That way it applies, or it multiplies my movement by whatever is inside my speed variable. Now some of you are probably thinking, you set it to 1. Whatever number you multiply it by 1, whatever number there multiplied by 1 is just going to be 1. It's not going to do anything. You are correct. Let me show you why it doesn't matter. So I'm going to attach that to Unity real quick, and I'm going to hit stop, and I'm going to go back into Unity. If I select my player object, give it a second. If I select my player object and go down to the script here, I can see I now have this new option called speed. Well, where did that come from? Well, we made it. When we create a public variable in our script, it actually forces the Unity editor to create a new area for us to improve or increase or decrease or change that variable without having to go back into our script all the time. So I can increase my speed here on this public variable just by grabbing and dragging, or I can type in an actual number or whatever. Oh, and that allows me to play my game. All right, so I'm going a little faster. That's good, that works. Maybe I want it to be even faster than that. So I can go back here and change it to, let's say 10, see what 10 does. Oh no, that's way fast. Anyway, I can fine-tune this while I'm playing it, right? That's the best part about Unity. We can create these public variables like this, and we can use those public variables inside the editor so we don't always have to go back and change our script over and over again. Okay, this has already been very, very long, and you're probably already just blown out, like your brain is just probably mush at this point. I want to very quickly review what we've done so that it can kind of cement in your brain. We're going to add on to this next week or next video. So we have a private rigid body 2D variable called player. And in here, in the start method, we're getting reference to that player so we can access its rigid body 2D. That's pretty easy. That's easy to do. Then we also have our public float speed, which is a public variable. And down here in our update method, we're getting references to the input values, meaning our user is typing a key on the keyboard. And then we're using those references to create some kind of movement. All right, so that's all we're doing here. Now, when you're done with this game, all I need you to do is turn in the script that you've written. How you can get access to your script is right-click here and go to Show in Explorer. And it's going to pull it up in your Explorer. So this right here, this player controller.cs, that's all I need you to turn in. Because then what I'll do is I'll dump your player controller script into my game, attach it to the player, and make sure it actually works. So that's all I need you to do to turn in this project. In the next video, we're going to expand on this and actually build this game so it works the way it's supposed to. All right, that's it for me. Thank you for paying attention. I will see you next time.